Intro music fades in and then out.
Okay, let's start with a big question. What if the law that governs the stars is exactly the same law that governs stories? I mean, what if the deep physics that shape galaxies are secretly hiding in plain sight, in the way we tell stories, the way we think, and yeah, even in that frustrating gap between what we want to do and what we actually do? Today, we're going to dive into a pretty radical idea, that there's a single universal code connecting all of it.
So where do we even start with something that big? Well, our journey actually begins in a pretty unexpected place, a recent Chinese historical drama. And it turns out, the way this story solves its main problem, it's like it accidentally gives us the blueprint for a much, much deeper reality.
See, this is the core puzzle that the drama, Pursuit of Jade, is trying to figure out. And it's a classic, right? You've got this super powerful person or thing that wants to save someone or something really vulnerable. To do that, it has to enter their world, get on their level. But how do you do that without your sheer power just completely overwhelming and destroying the very thing you came to save? It's a huge problem.
And the solution the story comes up with? Well, it taps into some of the oldest patterns we have. You've got this central image of a perfect, incorruptible piece of jade hidden away in a humble, low-status container, which sounds a lot like the divine logos taking on human form, right? And the whole descent happens when a nobleman genuinely enters the world of a commoner, a process that theologians actually have a word for, kenosis or self-emptying. But let's be super clear, this isn't about religion. It's about spotting a universal solution to a fundamental problem. How do you influence something without destroying it?
And get this. The mechanics of the whole thing are literally encoded right there in the characters' names. The heroine's name, Fan Chengyu, it translates to caged enduring jade. The hero's true name means heaven's justice holding the balance, and his disguise, the authenticated word in a false frame. I mean, come on. The whole story is basically a machine, and these names are the gears, laid out for us to see right from the very beginning.
So that's when you have to ask, what if this isn't just a story? What if this narrative pattern is actually a physical law wearing a costume? I mean, what if you could write it as an equation?
Okay, let's really get into this. On one side, you have the most famous equation in physics, and on the other, its conceptual twin. The idea here is that the impact of something, its effect, is equal to the thing itself, the action, multiplied by the square of its context. Just think about it for a second. Whispering a secret, that's the action, in a library has a totally different effect than shouting that same secret at a press conference, right? The action is the same, but the context changes everything. The underlying structure is identical.
Now, the real key to this whole thing is that little squared term. In physics, c squared isn't just some huge number you multiply by. No, it actually represents a geometric space. It's the bounded, symmetrical arena where mass gets converted into energy. And the claim is, the exact same principle applies here. The squared context is the arena where an action has to play out to create an effect.
And this leads to a really profound way of looking at things. We know that physical mass is really just a super concentrated form of energy. Well, in this model, an action or an idea is the same thing. It's just condensed potential. And to unleash that potential, to turn it into real energy or a real effect, you have to map it across that bounded squared space. Doesn't matter if that space is space-time or just the shared context between two people having a conversation.
Okay, so how far does this pattern go? Does it scale? Well, the idea is that it doesn't just apply to stars and stories. It might actually govern the very process of how we think and act, moment to moment.
So, according to this framework, our consciousness operates across 7 distinct planes or layers. The easiest way to think about it is like a ladder. An idea starts at the very top in the realm of pure abstract consciousness, and then it has to descend, step by step, all the way down to the bottom rung, concrete physical reality. First, let's talk about the ascent. This is when you're taking in the world and forming a new idea. And when we do this, just look at where we spend most of our time and energy. On the physical and emotive planes. It makes sense, right? We gather data through our senses from the world around us, and then we have an emotional reaction to it. That's the bedrock for pretty much any new thought.
But now, look at the descent. This is the journey from that idea back down into a real-world action. And this, to me, is where it gets so relatable, because it perfectly illustrates that disconnect we all feel. We spend tons of time in those higher, abstract planes, planning, thinking, feeling. But the final physical act itself, wow, it takes up a tiny, tiny fraction of the total time, just 7.6%.
And okay, here's where things get really, really strange. If you actually do the math on this descent, calculating the efficiency of moving from one plane to the next, the final product you get is about 0.365. And the model claims this is not a coincidence. It suggests that the cycle of human consciousness, of making things real, is somehow fundamentally coupled to the orbital mechanics of our own planet.
So let's zoom in on that final, really difficult step, because this model doesn't just describe the process, it actually tries to quantify that friction that we all know so well, that massive gap between deciding to do something and, actually doing it.
So what does that friction look like? It looks like this: 46.3%. That number represents the average amount of energy that's just lost in that final step of turning an intention into a physical action. Think about that. Almost half of all the energy you've built up just vanishes right at the finish line.
This whole phenomenon has a name: the emotive physical bottleneck. It's basically the huge cost of doing business for being a physical being. It's the price you pay for trying to force a complex, high-dimensional feeling or idea through the super narrow gate of simple physical action. And it's the perfect explanation for why I feel like I should go for a run so often fails to become I am now running.
And when you break down the numbers, it's just wild. The energy loss between all those higher planes, it's pretty small, just a few percent here and there. But that final jump from feeling to doing, a staggering 46.3% loss. So the really crucial point here is that this isn't just you feeling lazy. It's a quantifiable, structural bottleneck built into the very process of making things happen.
Okay, so we've got this incredible pattern that seems to connect stories, physics, and our own consciousness. But so what? What's the point of all this? Well, the goal is to take this really abstract map and turn it into a practical tool, something we can actually use to navigate our lives more effectively.
And this is one of those tools. It's called the Alethicon Pulse Protocol. It's basically a 7-step checklist designed to get your idea fully aligned with reality before you try to act. By consciously asking yourself these questions, who am I right now? What's the real context? Where can I actually apply leverage? You're basically walking yourself down that ladder of the 7 planes we saw earlier. And by doing that, you can dramatically reduce the amount of energy that gets wasted in that big emotive physical bottleneck.
And that really brings us to the final big thought. If one single, scalable pattern can describe how energy works, how a good story works, and how our own consciousness works, it forces you to ask a pretty powerful question, doesn't it? What else out there is secretly running on the same fundamental code? And, maybe more importantly, what could we achieve if we actually learned how to see it everywhere?